Good morning.
Good morning.
I think that has to be one of my favorite verses of the New Testament, when no one dared ask him any more questions. That's pretty good. There isn't any doubt, any question as to what the core of Jesus' teaching ministry is. The core, the solid center is love. Love of God, love of neighbor. In Mark 12, a scribe comes to ask him, who does not seem to be testing him. The scribe seems to be genuinely interested in what he's teaching. And he says, which commandment is first of all? And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In Matthew 5, he says, you've heard, love your neighbor, but I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. In Matthew 19, just 3 chapters before today's lesson, Jesus is approached by a rich young man who asks Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus ticks through some of the 10 commandments, and then he ends that section with, "Love your neighbor as yourself." In Matthew 22, we have today's lesson where a lawyer comes to test Jesus, and Jesus gives the 2 commandments. In Luke 10, a lawyer comes to test Jesus, says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Does this sound familiar? Is there an echo in here? Right? Jesus turns the question back to the lawyer and says, "Well, what do you think?" And the lawyer says, "Love of God and love of neighbor." And Jesus says, "You have answered correctly." And of course, in John 13, on the night before Jesus dies, after the Last Supper, after he has washed his disciples' feet, Jesus says, "I give you a new command, that you love one another just as I have loved you." We see it repeatedly. We see it when Jesus is asked questions of great importance. What's the most important law? What must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus always goes back to love of God and love of neighbor. It followed through, obviously, after Jesus' ministry and Paul's ministry. In Galatians 5, Paul says, "For the whole law is summed up in a single commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Of course, Jesus and Paul did not make up these 2 commandments, love of God and love of neighbor. They pulled them out of the Old Testament, out of the Hebrew Bible. Hebrew Bible, there are 613 commandments of the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Pentateuch or the Torah. And Leviticus 19:18, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And Deuteronomy 6:4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." As I said, there are 613 laws, and Jesus picks out 2 of those 613 laws. And so there were 611 other laws that Jesus could have chosen when Jesus is asked, "What's the greatest? And what do I need to do?" Jesus could have said the law in Leviticus, which forbade intermarriage between Israelites and non-Israelites, that set up the holiness of Israel. They were to be a nation set apart. He could have said that was the most important. They were to be a people that is set apart for God. And that would have utterly changed the rest of his ministry, and it would have changed the last 2,000 years of Christianity. He could have said that the kosher laws, the laws that forbid the eating of pork and the eating of shellfish and other things, he could have said those are the most important laws. That every time we sit down and put something in our mouth, we are to remind ourselves that we're to be holy people and we're to ingest holy things. He could have said that. Those laws are in there. It would have utterly changed his ministry, and it would have significantly impacted what we have on Easter Sunday morning for lunch after church. But Jesus doesn't go to those other 611. He goes to these two. In fact, when he's asked questions like, what is the greatest commandment? What's the most important commandment? And he answers with these questions. He's saying that, in effect, these have priority for him and for God. That these are the lens through which you see the rest of the Torah, the rest of the priorities of God. Everything comes back to love. In today's passage, he says that love of God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength is like the second command, love your neighbor as yourself. He says the two are like one another. Later in the New Testament, in the first epistle of John, John latches onto this and says, you can't say that you love God, who you do not see with your own two eyes, and then turn around and hate your brother, who you can see with your two eyes. The love of God and the love of people who are around us, our brothers and sisters, are like two sides of the same coin. The solid core of Jesus' teaching is love. There are some questions that emerge, like, what is love? It sounds like a fuzzy concept, like kind of vague, like, what exactly does it mean to love someone? Does it mean I have this like nice fuzzy feeling in my heart, and I have, pass on good intentions to them interiorly, or is it something else? In the Jewish concept of love, a lot of concepts, but particularly love, and in Jesus' understanding of love, love is not merely a feeling. Love is something that we do. It's actionable. It's actioned. You can actually see it happening. When Jesus is approached in the Gospel of Luke, and what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. The lawyer isn't quite satisfied. He then says, well, then who's my neighbor? Who do I have to love? And then he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, the guy who was beat up and thrown into the ditch. And then the priest walks by and does nothing, and the Levite walks by and does nothing, and then the Samaritan walks by and jumps into the ditch and helps the guy. And Jesus says, well, which one was a neighbor to the guy in the ditch? Which one loved his neighbor as himself? And the answer is obvious. It was obvious to the lawyer 2,000 years ago. It's obvious to us. It's the Samaritan. But notice that Jesus doesn't let the other two off the hook because of, whatever feelings that were going on inside them. He didn't say, well, the priest was really broken up in the whole thing. Really. But he was in his good clothes and he couldn't get dirty and bloody and he assumed someone else was going to come. He didn't say that the Levite really wanted to go and help him. It was just, moved with compassion, but he just didn't have time. He was late for a meeting at the temple. No, we get no interior picture of the motives or the thoughts or the feelings of the priest and the Levite. It's just they didn't do the thing. We also don't get any picture of the interior life of the Samaritan. It's not, the Samaritan could have been thoroughly disgusted and annoyed that he had to do this thing. But Jesus tells us, love is something that is put in action. The Samaritan, no matter what was going on inside of him, enacted love by jumping into the ditch, bandaging up his wounds, putting the man on his own horse, and taking him to someone else who would care for him. Love is something that we do. The other sorts of questions that come up when talking about love is, okay, who do I have to love? And this is one of the constant questions that Jesus is confronted with. It's what Jesus is confronted with in Luke. Who's my neighbor? Who do I have to love? Because you may have noticed there are some people in this world that are hard to love. Right? Am I the only one who has hard time loving some people? Like, no. Like, we all have them. We all know those people that are just like, ugh. And then, frequently when in church we talk about forgiveness, we tend to very quickly take forgiveness to its outer limits. Okay, well, I have to forgive everybody. Do we have to forgive Hitler? Do we have to forgive Saddam Hussein? Do we have to forgive Kim Jong-un? Right? And we can tend to do that with love, too. I'm supposed to love my neighbor. I'm supposed to love Kim Jong-un? Really? You may have noticed, you may not have, we're in the middle of an election season, did you know? You didn't? Mike, did you know? Mike did not know. Mike was unaware. Next Tuesday, cast your vote. In the state of sort of American politics these days, a lot of us support one of the candidates, plan on voting for them, or may have already voted for them. But in our politics today, we not only support one, but a lot of people that absolutely and thoroughly detest the other one. Are they our neighbor? Yeah. But here's the thing, right? And I totally understand wanting to push love of neighbor to the outermost limits, but I can say with a fair degree of certainty that none of us in this room are ever going to walk into a room where Kim Jong-un is. Right? And probably, this one's a little more likely, but we will probably never be in the presence of the political candidate that we didn't vote for. Probably. And so, if love is something that we put in action, we shouldn't let those extreme cases get us off the track of what love actually is. Yes, I think if we were walking down the street and we saw Kim Jong-un in the ditch on the side of the road, I believe that Jesus compels us, our faith compels us, to jump in the ditch and help him. And pray that whatever mercy we show him, he would then turn around and show to his people. We're walking down the street and the political candidate that we didn't vote for is in the ditch. I think our Christian faith compels us to jump in and help, but that's probably unlikely. Because love is something that we put in action. Love is most clearly seen and put into action locally, around us. The people who we live with, the people in our extended family, the people in our extended social groups, our co-workers, other people who go to St. Mark's. And then we keep pushing that circle out to the people that we happen to meet at the grocery store or wherever else we happen to be. There is where we have an opportunity to put love into action. Remembering that love isn't just a feeling, but love is something that we do. I want you just to think for a moment about a time in the past year where you felt loved. Maybe where you were just bowled over by someone extending love to you. Y'all got a time or two? For me, honestly, it was about 11 months ago after my stroke, when all of you reached out to me in just incredible and humbling ways. Cards, meals, well wishes, prayers. I mean, it was just incredibly touching. If we had time this morning, we could probably go around the room and probably tell similar stories. Sometimes that when we were low, felt lifted up. And maybe it was by someone that we really, really like, and maybe we were lifted up by someone that to be outside of that. I think love is most often shown in simple ways. Oftentimes, love is shown in ways that are free. Or at least, don't put you out of a lot of money, a kind word, a shoulder to cry on. Asking someone, look, I don't agree with you, I don't understand your perspective. Can you help me understand your perspective? That's extending honor and love towards them, providing a meal, providing them help when they're down. That is extending love. Concrete, actionable action things. The last thing I'll say about love is, it's the solid core of Jesus' teaching. You can't, have Jesus without the love that he shows and the love that he compels us to live. And because it's the solid core of his teaching, it's meant to be the solid core of our lives. These little things that others do for us and we do for others, to show them, to demonstrate, to put in action our love for them and their love for us. And we're never done. I will never get to the end of love your neighbor as yourself. You will never. Mother Teresa never did it. There's never done, got that command, now let's move on to the next command. There's always someone else. There's always another challenging situation. There's always another opportunity to extend kindness and grace, forgiveness and love to those who are around us, if not those who are across the world. Like Moses never made it to the promised land, we never make it to the end of loving our neighbor. And yet, because teaching it was Jesus' life's work, it is meant to be our life's work.